So Vanessa, let me start with you. Pernod Ricard, the second largest wine and spirits maker on the planet, a huge company, deals with all kinds of packaging and materials, and has been working on this recycling and waste problem for quite some time. You, under Alex Picard, just rolled out a new sustainability program. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. It was announced in April, is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
And you're spearheading that.
Yes.
Tell us what that entails.
Yes, so sustainability is not new for Pernod Ricard, of course. Yeah. We've had a long history in that. Actually, we have an oceanography institute, for example, that's more than 50 years old. And we had a 2020 roadmap, so we've done things like reduce our water consumption by 20% and our carbon emissions by 30%. But really, we wanted to create a new strategy that was linked to every single part of our business. I've heard people talking about CSR this morning. For us, it's broader than that. It is the business, basically. So we've built a strategy that has 4 key parts. The first is around our terroir, because all our products come from nature, and I think it's easy to forget that about a drinks company. The second is, of course, valuing our people, our own people, and through the supply chain. And then it's about circular making, the topic that we're talking about today. And fourthly, about responsible hosting, how we sell and market those products in the right way. So those are all hugely important. We're very lucky because most of our product is glass, so we are 99% recyclable. So it's the 1% that is predominantly plastic that we need to eliminate for the future. Huh.
So that's a very interesting distinction, though, between recyclable and actually recycled. I mean, are you involved on the recycling end of it to make sure that the recyclable materials actually do get recycled?
As much as we can do. I mean, we can't always influence all our suppliers and how they're making the products, which we're starting to do more now. But as much as we can in countries where there is a stronger recycling. For example, we're involved in schemes in Brazil, one called Glass is Good, and one in the US, a Glass Coalition. But you know, we're not doing them directly for ourselves, but that is part of our strategy for 2030 to see how we can put in place 10 strong recycling initiatives for the future.
You earlier spearheaded this campaign to eliminate straws, plastic straws, non-biodegradable straws. You want to talk a little bit about that and why you took that on and what the impact and the challenges of it were?
Yes, so I would say we were definitely one of the first global companies to put in place that ban, and certainly we were the first in China to ban plastic straws. We do now look to use alternatives. We have seaweed straws, for example. But actually for us, it's not waiting for any kind of ban. Obviously the EU now is talking about 2021, the new ban on 10 types of different plastic items that we ban. We're really in advance of that. We've already announced that as part of our 2030 strategy, that 100% of our brand packaging will be recyclable, compostable or reusable. We've also announced that by 2025, we will have no single-use plastic in any of our promotional materials, which when you consider we're in 87 countries is quite a challenge.
Wow. So Rob, I want to come to you. You're on the investing side of this equation. You're looking for opportunities to make money in all this. Tell us a little bit about Circulating Capital and how it was formed and kind of what your mandate is and what your background is.
Circulating Capital came about because of the ocean plastic problem. Mm-hmm. We looked at some of the science that found that most of the plastic that gets into the ocean comes from this part of the world, South and Southeast Asia. We started looking at what would it take to catalyze capital to really solve that problem. It's going to take much more than the $100 million we have to put to work, much more than the $1 billion the Alliance End Plastic Waste. It's many billions and billions of dollars that are going to be required for infrastructure across the region. And the only way you get access to that capital is if you show it's an investable and bankable sector. So we are focused on being that first fund, first institutional capital in to de-risk it. We do it in partnership and on behalf of large corporates. So our investors are the buyers of this material. PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Dow, you heard from yesterday. They're the ones who want access to it, but they can't get it today because the supply chains aren't developed enough.
And are you focused on the kind of front of the process or the back of the process? Are you investing primarily in the materials side or on the waste management, recycling side?
We think about it as full value chain. You have to invest along design, delivery of product, collection, processing. At the end of the day, there's no silver bullet for this problem. We're not going to be able to recycle our way out of it. We're not going to be able to reduce our way. We're not going to be able to design our way out of this challenge. What's going to have to happen is a suite of solutions, right, that each do their part to really reorient a billion-dollar value chain.
So it's interesting to me that you say that you kind of mainly focus on fundraising from companies that have skin in the game on this, that are already invested in it. But does that mean that this is something that as an investment product would be difficult to sell to someone who didn't have that added incentive? I mean, do you try to just go to rapacious institutional investors who really don't care about the environment or just looking for a profit? And can you make a successful pitch to them, or does it have to be somebody that gets another fringe benefit from it?
That's a great point. They're not ready yet. There's a missing middle in the capital flow right now. You have large institutional investors trying to allocate billions. They need certain things, right? And meanwhile, we're looking at a pipeline that's single-digit millions of opportunity per investment, per transaction. There need to be funds, larger funds, funds of funds, PE activity, where you're able to move the flow of capital like a commodity. And those investors need to see a few things. They need to see a track record of where people are making money so that they can follow. They need to see access to that pipeline, and they need to see those intermediated investment products.
So, I mean, what kind of returns can you promise people?
Well, with the corporates, we've told them this is a break-even proposition for you. This isn't, and that works because this isn't how they make money. They're interested in delivering quality product in a safe and convenient way to their customers. They want the value chain built, but they don't want to be in that business. But if our fund at the end of the day breaks even, we're not going to be able to go to those institutional investors and say, look what we could have done, trust us. We need to show actually we're able to generate a high single-digit return, and that's our target.
And do you have a lot of competition in this space, or are you kind of alone in trying to do this at the moment?
I'd say we're pretty much the first in this region that has this dedicated focus. Lots of other funds will dabble in it. They'll have one waste or recycling deal or one alternative material deal in their broader portfolio of 30, 40, 50. But the idea for us is to build that investment marketplace and catalyze that capital.
So, Vanessa, let me turn to you, and I want to ask you the investor question as well, because this is very an urgent issue for a big corporation that's publicly traded like Pernod Ricard. You've got among your investors a whole gamut of different entities that range from a big company like BlackRock, which is a big holder, and has been very public in saying that it's committed to sustainable investment, and it will invest in companies that take on that responsibility and make those commitments. But you've also got investors on the other end of the spectrum. Elliott Management has got a 2.5 point share, and they've been very clear in saying that what they expect is high returns, and they're not so fussed about this touchy-feely sustainability stuff. How does a company like yours mediate those very different perspectives of investors?
Firstly, I'm very pleased to say we had very strong results last year.
Okay, all right, good.
Results, the strongest results we've had for 12 years, so that's a good start. But secondly, I think really, and very much driven by our CEO, Alexandre Ricard, who's a young CEO. His name is on the door of the family business, and he's really driven by sustainability for the long term. He really believes that sits within the business. So for us, I think it's not just seeing it as business risk, as really seeing it as opportunity for the future, as opportunity to really strengthen the way that we do things, how we drive our processes, how we change the things that we do, and really to drive innovation in terms of business resilience. And I think to give you one example, what we're doing around packaging is really, really crucial. We know that by reducing the weight of our packaging, etc., that's of course saving costs. So I think they don't have to sit apart from each other, and I think that's really the strong message that we're giving to investors. If you're building brands for the long term, and when you've got brands like Chivas Regal and Martell that are 300 years old, you have to sustain them, and you have to build them in the right way for the future. So.
Fascinating. I want to take questions from the audience. While people are thinking, let me zero in on that question of the consumer, which is a fascinating one. I mean, you've got a series of products that are marketed in a very particular way, each one of them, and they have to appeal to customers' lifestyle values and their kind of broader aspirations and kind of fit in with their own identity and their image. I mean, does sustainability really fit in that? I mean, if you're advertising and marketing Absolute vodka, does somebody that's about to buy a bottle of vodka stop and think, oh, I'm going to buy the sustainable vodka?
I think increasingly, yes. I mean, there's a whole load of numbers out there that we see today. So, you know, whether those are true or not, but definitely the trend is towards that. And if you look at a brand like Absolute, which actually was amongst, if not the first carbon neutral distillery in the world, most of what it's doing is circular. You know, 43% of it is recycled glass. You know, also things like, you know, it was very early on in the LGBT scene. You know, it's really doing things that are meaningful change. So it's a brand with a social and environmental purpose, and I think increasingly consumers are looking for that, as well as, by the way, looking to join companies who are doing that. You know, it's a real winner, I think, in terms of talent attraction for the future.
I've been in the environmental space for 20 years. I don't think we've ever seen a topic driven from almost obscurity to priority number one on a global scale so fast. 3 years ago, we wouldn't be having this topic here, you know, on the stage at this conference. Now it's at the UN, it's in the White House, it's everywhere. And I think it's largely because of the consumer engagement in this space. The topic went into the zeitgeist, and people are, corporates, governments are being responsive to that.
Questions? Do I see any hands or mic wranglers? Are we looking?
Otherwise, I might just add something to that. I mean, I think that is one of the major challenges around waste management, actually, is the consumer. Because I think at the moment, you know, whether the infrastructure that is there or not is one element to it, but actually, you know, consumers, if you ask them, are you recycling, everybody says yes. But actually, are they really? And are the systems being made simple enough for them to do it? And are the producers making the packaging simple enough to do it too?
Can we talk about China? I mean, how does all this play out in this big, fast-growing market?
Listen, China is a hugely important market. It's one of the most important markets for Pernod Ricard. Again, great growth we posted last week, plus 21%, I'm pleased to say. So it will continue to be a very important country for us in terms of investment. We also announced last week a £150 million investment. We will be the first to be building a malt whiskey distillery, Emishan, here, and that will really take on board sustainable practices too. We're also working very closely with the Tsinghua University on how to build and develop sustainable practices as part of our industry. So we're trying to build and learn from others as well here in China.
It's fascinating. So the malt whiskey plant will be where?
It'll be in the Shenzhen province.
Sichuan? Is that
Sichuan.
Sichuan.
Thank you very much.
Oh, interesting. All right. That's fascinating. And we've talked a bit about water.
And sorry on that, one of the things that we'll be doing is taking some of the learnings from places like Absolute. So for example, in Absolute, all the byproducts go to feed 250 pigs and cows every day. So we'll be looking to take similar practices learned from other places in the world.
Wow. And how does it work at a malt whiskey distillery? Obviously, it uses a lot of water. Is that water, is it like the jeans factory that Bill described, where it's all recaptured and it's drinkable when it comes out, or how does that work?
It's a mixture, but one of the things that we're absolutely determined to do is that in areas where there's high risk water issues, that we make sure that we are completely water balanced. That's one of our commitments as well for 2030.
Rob, what do you see in China as kind of the trends in this space, and are you able to sort of find investors here that are interested in sustainable investments?
Yeah, well, China upset the apple cart in the global waste space through their national sword policy over the last couple of years.
Right.
And it's really driven massive investment opportunities on a country by country level because so much of the world was reliant on export to China. And as a result of that, you now have to process much more of your waste domestically to create value. And so before it was really a value extraction strategy, and instead now it's building local value chains that can keep that value domestically. And instead of waste being viewed as a cost or a problem, it's actually being viewed as a solution and a resource for future opportunities.
Interesting, this may be somewhat beyond the scope of what you do, but it's been interesting to see, at least in the United States, the reaction of the different municipalities to the national sword policy. We've had some municipalities like New York that have seemed to kind of take this in stride and figure it out and find sustainable ways to deal with their waste. And then we've had other municipalities, I think of Philadelphia, which are just in full panic mode. Their landfills are piling up. They're burning plastic because they can't find any place else to put it. I mean, do you track the different cities and their different responses in trying to kind of find investment opportunities? And why is it that the comparable East Coast cities would seem to have such absolutely different reactions to this policy from China?
The challenges with the US and Europe as well is that we have a very long legacy of infrastructure and bets that were placed many decades ago that we're now paying the price for. So New York invested in one of the most advanced recycling facilities in the world in Brooklyn. Philadelphia did not. Right? And what we have is an opportunity to drive market-based solutions in South and Southeast Asia and in China, because you have connection between supply and demand. I can go out tomorrow in the United States and say, I'll pay 10 times as much for your waste or your plastic, and not a single household will change their behavior. No one will recycle differently. Those cities won't see more money. Right? They will, they're disconnected from that demand cycle. When you go to places like Indonesia or India or China, there are millions of people whose livelihood is dependent on managing that waste. And that's an opportunity. Right? There's challenges that come along with it. Social challenges, how do you improve the livelihood of those folks? But there's incredible market efficiency that can create value locally.
It's interesting. So what I hear you saying in part is that a lot of countries, Southeast Asia, China, India, that don't yet have these systems in place and don't have legacies in place can really learn from both the successes and the mistakes of cities in North America and in Europe.
I mean, I talk about like landlines to mobile phones all the time.
Where there's not this kind of legacy and you can leapfrog. And I also hear you sort of saying that it makes a big difference whether the cities have contracted with companies who are waste management companies versus companies who are in the recycling and recovery business. Right?
Yeah, that's right, actually. One of the big differences between a city like New York and Philadelphia is the set of the contract and where the entrenched interests are in that legacy infrastructure. If you have if you're a waste management company and you have an internal cost of capital of $5 to put a ton of waste in a hole, you'll always do that. Even if you can make revenue on the other side, you have an innovator's dilemma. So the interesting opportunity is how do you restructure those contracts to share the revenue and share the incentives so that the whole system is aligned for that recycling and reuse.
So that's super interesting because it sounds like, I mean, if you think of the sort of typical waste management company, they probably also don't have the technological capability to shift into the recycling business, which is a much more capital-intensive, technology-intensive kind of undertaking. So, is this something though that you see as primarily the mandate of the municipalities to force that shift, or can private capital funds like yours be a part of the solution?
Well, I think when a fund comes into a community and says, "Look, we're going to take capital off the table as the barrier." That changes the dialogue, because the problem in many of these conversations is like, who's going to pay for it? So if you can come in and say, like, actually, we know how to pay for it, so you help but here's the enabling policies that are required, here's the structures that are required, you can drive a lot more, you can accelerate a lot more impact.
Yeah, it's a very interesting structure and system in France, actually, with Citeo and Adelph, which we were really early pioneers with them back in the 90s. And it is that the producer pays depending on the amount and quantity of waste. And actually, it's a system that works very well. And I think it's fair to say that France is quite advanced in waste management as a result, because it has a very strong infrastructure in place.
I'm looking for questions here. Don't be shy. I want to ask you about the Alliance, because I know you're involved in this. Tell us a little bit more about that, how it works, and then I want to ask you, Vanessa, about whether allying, even with potential competitors on this particular issue, is a strategy that makes sense.
So you heard Jim Fitterling yesterday talk about the Alliance
Yeah.
on Plastic Waste.
Yeah.
They've committed $1.5 billion.
And how old is this now? This has been around?
They announced it in January.
And how many companies?
Over 30.
Over 30, okay.
And we partner with a lot of them. We have similar investors that are invested in us as well as the Alliance. So that's how we're kind of connected. I think it's a signal of how serious this issue has become for these companies. There's a group of folks that have historically been more about preventing environmental progress. And now they're trying to get out in front and drive environmental progress. I hope they're successful, right? That's a huge momentum builder. I think what we're now watching, though, is because there's so much resources coming in and so much interest and momentum, you start to see bifurcations, right? Like a year ago, and still to this day, nobody's in favor of plastic waste. That's one of the great things about this when you compare it to climate change. You have entrenched interests on either side. That's not the case here. But what we do have is people now saying, my solution is better than your solution. And absolutists are false prophets in environmental causes. There is no silver bullet. What we have to do is build that suite of solutions, and there will be industry-led things like the Alliance. There will be investor-led things. There will be new materials that need to be developed, and they will all contribute a part to that reorientation of the value chain.
And do you work with other companies on this, or is this kind of a solitary?
No, we do. I mean, some of the plastic topic issues that we need to solve for the future. For example, bag in box is one of those in the wine industry. So we're working with the wine industry to see how we can solve that together. So no, I mean, we know we can only, we only know so much ourselves. So it's absolutely about working in collaboration with others and learning from other people. I think the key thing for us is, honestly, it's about transformational change. It's about transformational, systemic change, and it's really about altering the mindset within the business, which I think, we've really kind of given a good re-kick start to that with the new strategy, and it's really shifting. So, for example, with our marketeers, getting them to think about what is going to happen to that product and that packaging at its end of life. Rather than, leaving it to the operations people and saying, please just create me this beautiful bottle. No, they should be thinking about it at the beginning. So, I mean, that's a real mindset shift for us. And now we've put much greater responsibility on the marketeers in our business. So that transformational change is really starting to happen.
And I think many of these corporates and NGOs and government organizations are recognizing that this is a system problem that requires a system solution. There is no single actor that can really drive that change. And so you have to come together in a pre-competitive space. Like I said, nobody at Absolute is interested in competing on, how much recycled content they have in the marketplace, right? It's a value chain. Everyone will benefit if rising tide lifts all boats.
Vanessa, I'm still looking for questions, folks. Wake up, ask a question. I got a good one for you, though. Bill's comment to me about the relationship between CEOs and CSOs was a really interesting observation. And I mean, we've seen this in other types of verticals as well, whether it's design, whether it's social responsibility or whatever. But the paradox often is that when a company designates a C-level officer to be in charge of something, then the CEO says, oh, geez, what a relief. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I mean, does Alex say, thank God I have Vanessa. It's her problem now. I don't have to deal with this. Or how does he work with you? How does he work with you?
In fact, he says, please, I want to be involved in this process. So, actually in building this strategy, we involved more than 300 people in the organization for a start. And I personally did 60 interviews with all our CEOs, obviously including Alex. We've set up a senior steering committee, which Alex heads up, which we will meet 3 to 4 times a year. And in between that, honestly, when there are topics that need to be discussed, like when we joined the Ellen MacArthur, we wanted to sign the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I discussed that with him and he agreed immediately that we needed to go ahead and do that. So it's a very day-to-day relationship, actually. He truly believes that this adds significant value to the business. He truly believes, actually, and I think one of the things, if you ask him now, he'd be most proud of is the fact that we've really begun to seriously engage our employees. We've created a butterfly effect that is really starting And it started with something we call Responsible Day that actually we do every year. But this year we did it around circular making. And it was phenomenal. Here in China, we visited something like 300 outlets in 45 cities, talking to them about, the impact of plastic straws and how we should be thinking about alternatives. So really engaging all our employees thinking about what do we mean about circular making and how can we improve things.
Huh. Dan, did you, when you took this job, 2 years ago, is that right?
Yes.
When he offered it to you, did you have that conversation with him about, are you serious about this? Or?
Absolutely. I wanted to be very clear that, because I think businesses today, everyone's finding their feet, let's be honest. It's still an immature discipline, and it's not my historical background. And I really wanted to be sure that the company was going to be really, committed and driven behind that. And I think one other thing to add is that the very fact that our CEOs all have targets and ambitions linked to our new 2030 strategy, which has 35 targets, I think is an indication of the drive and support behind it.
Just one thing I'd add to that, which, there are some incredible companies, many of them here, many of them invested in us, that have CEO leadership. But they are actually not the majority of the material that's getting into the marketplace. In most of the countries where we're investing, there's a whole other small and medium-sized sector that can be 50, 60%. And so it's very easy and convenient to take on the multinationals because they are the ones that have the most brand risk. But when we think about solutions, they do need to involve all of the plastic or waste that's getting into the system, not just the ones driven by US or European companies, but the local ones as well, because they're the ones who sometimes don't have to comply with those local regulations.
Right. That's really interesting. So it's definitely a small and medium-sized enterprise issue as well. I mean, I was kind of surprised to hear Jim Fitterling come in and say, 25% of my time I'm worrying about that.
I tweeted it.
Is that, do you think that is comparable at the other companies that you see, or?
I think it's getting there. The chemical industry, probably so. They have, as Jim said in his word, it's an existential crisis. I think, you see a lot of other brand owners, they don't really care if they make their stuff out of plastic or aluminum. You've seen that in the US, the beverage companies are shifting, adding now aluminum. It's up to the consumer to choose it. They won't, in my opinion. They'll still buy the convenience of plastic in many cases, but the brands aren't really the ones who have the most to lose here. So it is causing, a lot of senior executive. I mean, for us, we have 7 investors, and it was a CEO decision at each company.
That'll have to be the last word. Rob, Vanessa, I want to thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.